Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you, and I want to thank you all for joining me this afternoon as I provide an update on the progress made by our government this fall session. This session, under the incredible leadership of our Premier Danielle Smith, who I might add, recently received an overwhelming supportive mandate from our members of 91.5%, has led our government, which has been laser focused on protecting and promoting Alberta's rights and freedoms, which are the cornerstones of living in a free and democratic society. It's also the theme that unites the 13 pieces of legislation passed this fall, one of which that was on full display on October 28th when we kicked off our fall session with the introduction of Bill 24, the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act, the passage of which enshrines the rights of Albertans to personal autonomy and protects medical choices, property rights, and legal firearms use in our province. The passage of the Health Statutes Amendment Act and the Education Amendment Act creates a comprehensive framework to preserve choice for minors, to support student success and well-being in schools, and to ensure kids and youth in Alberta are supported as they grow into adults to become the people they want to become. This session saw Alberta be a leader in Canada with the passage of the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act, a one-of-its-kind piece of legislation in Canada that protects the fairness and safety of Alberta's amateur competitive sports system by ensuring women and girls are able to compete in biological female-only divisions and support the formation of additional co-ed divisions to ensure transgender athletes can meaningfully participate in the sports of their choice. The passage of the Protection of Privacy Act ensures Alberta has the strongest privacy protections with the strictest penalties for privacy violations in the nation. And we didn't stop there. This session also saw our government continue to stand up against the continual unconstitutional overreach from the federal government. We took strong, decisive action to safeguard Alberta's economy from the job-killing, unconstitutional federal emissions cap with the passage of the second Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act resolution. Our government has always been and will continue to be unapologetic in our fight to protect and promote the best interests of Alberta. All this was done in addition to our ongoing work to continue to diversify Alberta's economy, streamline processes, and maintain Alberta's status as one of the best business-friendly and investment-friendly environments in North America through the passage of legislation such as the All-Season Resorts Act. Because our government is relentless in our work to create the best future for Albertans and to ensure Alberta remains the best place to live, to play, to work, and to visit and raise a family. And I'm very proud of the progress our government has made during this session. My colleagues and I look forward to continuing to deliver for Albertans over the winter break and into the new year. And with that, I'll now turn it over to my press secretary, Amber Edgerton, for questions.
Hi, everyone. We'll do one question, one follow-up. Please, when you go to ask your question, state your name and then your outlet, and we'll start in the room and then go on the line. Janet.
It pays to sit next to the lectern. The Premier says that you will prorogue and have a throne speech. This is what she told my Radio Canada colleagues yesterday before the budget. Can you confirm this? And are you expecting any kind of cabinet shuffle?
Well, cabinet shuffles are always the prerogative of the Premier, so I would never presuppose what she intends to do with cabinet. But I think we have a tremendous cabinet right now and an amazing colleagues and our private members who are working tirelessly for Albertans and doing a great job. So I'll leave that in her capable hands.
Prorogue?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that.
Okay. The All Seasons Bill 35. So the NDP tried to amend the bill pertaining to the consultation requirements with Indigenous people. And they especially pointed out that this kind of conflict or lack of consultation with Indigenous people led to the Oka crisis when somebody had tried to plan a resort. So I just want to understand why you rejected that amendment and how are you going to prevent a similar kind of tension or standoff?
Well, I think they're wildly overstating the case. This legislation doesn't do anything to change any engagement standards with Indigenous communities or on the environmental front. In fact, the comments made by the NDP and Naheed Nenshi just go to show how little they actually understand about the tourism sector. I mean, Naheed Nenshi himself even doesn't even understand the difference between provincial and national parks. So, you know, it's hard to take any lessons from that kind of understanding of the tourism sector and jurisdiction. But what I can say is all this legislation actually does, and you notice by the size of the bill, is it's framework legislation that enables us to streamline the process that already exists but is currently disjointed, confusing, and difficult for investors to understand. We're bringing it into tourism and sport. We've created a sole life cycle regulator, and through that process, the government and the department will evaluate master plans as they're proposed. When those master plans are proposed, they will have to go through all the existing Indigenous consultation as well as the environmental consultations that currently exist. Furthermore, I would say that we have heard tremendous support for this from Indigenous communities as they look to become meaningful partners in tourism product development. It's the exact reason why we expanded the mandate of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation to include tourism products. These are products that are $20 million or larger. These aren't, you know, and given what I've heard from markets around the world, people from around the world, in Canada, even in Alberta, they want authentic Indigenous tourism products. So we're creating a path for that, and I have no idea why the NDP is so opposed to it.
Matt?
Matthew with the Journal. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think any of these bills have gotten royal assent yet. Is there a reason for the holdup, or when might we accept that?
They received royal assent this morning at 10 o'clock.
Very good. Speaker Cooper alluded to this at the end last night. He seemed to indicate that the feel in the legislature, the discussions in the chamber were a lot more civil, a lot more cordial than in previous terms. Would you agree with that, and why might that have been?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, look, you have one simple seat change, you put Rachel Notley in the back row, and look what happens. All that really, you know, what I would say is that I have seen great debate from both sides of the, you know, from our government side, from the opposition side. We've seen a lot of quality debate over, I think, previous strategy of quantity of debate, and I think Albertans are better served for it. And like you said, Matthew, I think decorum has been great in the chamber, and it's been great to go in there and do the people's work in an environment that's great to come to.
Catherine?
Now, speaking of decorum, with the NDP party leader not in the House, you're allowed to say Naheed Nenshi, you're allowed to refer to his presence or absence. How do you think that dynamic might change when he gets a seat?
Well, I think you've pointed out one of the big problems is when. My question is when. When is Naheed Nenshi going to join us in the legislature? It's been, I think, 166 days since he became leader of the NDP. And while our leader, Danielle Smith, comes to work every day and leads our members in the chamber and stays there for the entire question period, shows up for votes, their leader is somewhere in the building, or maybe not in the building, acting like an armchair quarterback, throwing shots at our government when he's chosen not to even show up for work. So I'll leave that in his hands as to when he decides to join us and when one of their members decides to resign and open a seat for him.
And on, well, I guess it's no longer a bill, but Bill 27, when the budget is tabled in February, what can we expect to see in terms of an increase to funding for women's sport, and for athletes who may be trans or non-binary?
Sure. So I will leave the contents of the budget that will be released on 27th of February, it'll be the last Thursday of February. I'll leave the contents for whenever it's tabled. What I would say when it comes to supporting sports, particularly trans athletes, we will continue to work with the provincial sport organizations, public institutions, and post-secondaries as needs arise. It's important that everyone gets a chance to compete. Everyone gets a chance to play. And where numbers are necessary, we will find the resources to make sure we're supporting those organizations and creating those co-ed divisions.
Jonathan?
Hi, Jonathan Bradley, Western Standard. So you spoke about a number of major bills being passed this session with the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act and the 3 gender identity bills. How do you want this session to be remembered, say, in the future by future governments?
I want this session to be remembered the same way every other session is remembered, is that we come to work every day and we do the people's business. And since Danielle Smith has become Premier of Alberta, She has spent the last 2 years traveling this province, listening, genuinely listening to Albertans and their concerns, and those concerns are reflected in legislation. So I think that that's exactly what you've seen here, and that's how I want the entire term and her entire tenure as Premier to be remembered, as someone who genuinely listened and took action, the action people asked for.
Okay, my follow-up pertains to the gender identity bills and the legality of them. So AGL Canada and the Skipping School Foundation have spoken about how they want to challenge the bills and have them struck down as unconstitutional. Do you anticipate any future bills to try to protect those constitutionality of those bills to come forward? Why or why not?
I think it's way too early for me to presuppose what's going to happen in the courts or what any organizations would do in the public with regards to legal challenges. I'll leave that in their hands, and we'll react accordingly, but I wouldn't comment on or presuppose anything like that.
Jack?
Jack Farrell with Canadian Press. Back to a decorum kind of question. The NDP in their wrap-up press conference this morning pointed out that the exact quote was they batted zero when it comes to their amendments that they put forward in this sitting. And I noticed, like, it wasn't hard to miss that, like, many of the amendments that were put forward weren't actually, like, no one from UCP stood up to speak to them. Not all of them, of course, but there was like quite a few. I remember there was one specifically about one of the trans bills about giving kids essentially the option to back out of the process of informing their parents if they wanted to once they were informed of the consequences. I'm just wondering why we didn't see more MLAs kind of speak to why they didn't support those amendments.
Well, MLAs will stand and speak whenever they feel it's necessary for them to speak. I don't tell anyone to speak or not to speak. So I would leave that to their decisions. But I think you have, again, pointed out something that I'm very happy about, and I will express my appreciation to Christina Gray as the House Leader in the Opposition for, I think, what has been an increased level of decorum in the chamber this week, or rather this session. So kudos to her and her caucus and our caucus for seeing the importance of the time we have in there, which I think is limited, and using it to the benefit of all Albertans.
And then as a follow-up, and apologies that it's not a wrap-up based question, but the next sitting is going to be in like 2 months or so, a little bit longer. Going into this sitting, like, we knew quite a few things that were going to come through. Like, we knew about the trans bills, we were expecting them. Besides like the budget, like, I'm struggling to think of what to expect in our next sitting. I'm hoping you can kind of give some details about what I can look forward to.
Where's the suspense in that?
Christmas break.
Well, I won't give you that kind of a Christmas present, but yes, of course, the budget is coming. We have estimates, and then we have the rest of the session that concludes roughly kind of before the beginning of June. But I wouldn't be in a position to start talking about bills coming forward. But as I've said in this press conference and other ones, that you can count on us to listen, to put forth legislation that's important to Albertans, and I think it'll be a great session just like this one was.
We're going to go to the phones. Operator, is there anyone queued on the line?
There are no further questions at this time, but if you have any questions, please press *1.
Okay. Then we'll go back to the room, give the people on the phones a moment to queue up. Lisa, go ahead.
Sorry, just to speak one in. Lisa Johnson, Canadian Press. I think the Premier has said, I'm not sure if it was the Premier, but it has been put in the public realm that the Compassionate Intervention Act is expected in the spring. Do you know how close that is to being accurate?
You always ask this question, not just you, Lisa, but I do appreciate the question. Again, it's not my bill, but I think the Compassionate Intervention Bill is one that's critical to the Alberta model of recovery. And now is a great time as ever to appreciate, acknowledge the vision of the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Dan Williams, who continues to show how much he cares about the Albertans who are stuck in the cycle of addiction, but also commend the Premier for continuing with the Ministry of Mental Health and Addiction, understanding that it's a holistic approach and making sure that we are taking care of Albertans, that they get to regain dignity, and that they are taken out of the cycle of addiction to become, strong contributors to society is so important. And it helps everything from public safety in the streets to tourism and making sure that our streets are safe and that people are taken care of. So I just more want to answer that question by giving credit to the Minister and the Premier, because we have made some serious steps, including removing the fees for recovery, making it more accessible for those who are struggling with addiction. So I'll finish on that, but grateful to those two individuals and everyone else who's being part of this recovery model.
I might ask as well, just to follow Jack, that amendment that the NDP introduced, giving students who are coming out essentially an opportunity to be fully informed of the consequences, what's going to happen, and they can back out. Why is that a bad thing? Like, why did you guys reject that amendment? It seems like it only fair.
Well, I think the legislation in its current form does exactly what we want it to do. And that is to make sure that parents know what is going on with their kids in school. And it makes sure that they are informed of the kind of content materials being taught. It's part of a larger suite of legislation that you know that also is going to reserve adult decisions for when people become adults, so they can become the Albertans and the people they want to become, and also make sure that there is safe and fair sports in Alberta. So while I appreciate the opposition brought forth a number of amendments on a whole suite of the bills we had, we did not accept them. It's not uncommon for the government not to accept opposition amendments. In many cases, the amendments are not shown to the government in advance. It doesn't give us time to prepare for them. But what I can say is that we feel the bill in its form, it's been passed and given royal assent today, is the bill that we want to see go forward.
I am seeing a question from the phone, so if we can have that caller put through.
Your first question comes from the line of Emmanuel Prince from Radio Canada. Your line is now open.
Sir, I just wanted to come back on the first question that Janet asked, which was that the Premier told us yesterday that she feels that the government has started work on about 90% of the things on the mandate letters of all the ministers, and that once they're all done, she's going to prorogue and call for a new throne speech. So when's that going to happen?
Well, I guess my first answer was I wouldn't comment. What I'd say is I will have discussions with the Premier about prorogation, and we'll move accordingly. I don't want to speak for her, and as the House Leader, I'll be involved. I'll definitely consult her on those decisions, but it is ultimately her decision to make to prorogue or whether not to prorogue, and we'll chat with her.
Do you have a follow-up?
Were you aware of that strategy, that plan?
Sorry, I don't understand the follow-up question. Can you, which strategy?
Were you aware of that strategy, that plan that the Premier had told us that she wanted to do?
Yeah, I speak to the Premier often about what the government is doing and how it's going to affect legislation going into the House. And so, broadly speaking, yes, I am abreast of what the Premier's plans are. And as we continue to execute on our mandate letters, I think Albertans are better off for it. So, again, I'll leave it in her hands as to whether we decide to prorogue or not, but I'll continue to communicate with her on what that plan looks like.
I do have a question related to that, because the Electoral Boundaries Commission Act requires the appointment to be done in the first session. So are you able to make those appointments through an order in council, or does the House have to be sitting in order to do that? Because it seems like proroguing would mess that up a bit.
That is a very good question. I'm going to have to get back to you on that.
Okay. And also the standing...
Despite how I look, I don't have all the answers.
But I have all the questions. And the standing orders say that unless otherwise stated, the MLAs will return on the second Tuesday. Is that the plan, or might you delay it to a bit closer to the budget date of that Thursday, February 27th?
I have a pretty decent conception in my mind of how the spring session will look. Certainly not finalized, and again, we do need to consult with the Premier's office. That calendar is due to be tabled on January 15th, and we'll consult with the opposition before that's done. So not all that has been done, so I'd hate to subvert the process before we go and talk to the opposition about the calendar. So respectfully, I'll have to decline to answer that question in full, but understand that, I mean there are general times when we do have the calendar laid out in the spring, and there are break weeks that are set out, things like Easter, after the budget, so and in May during the long weekend there. So I mean, you can kind of take a look at a calendar, get an idea of what it looked like, but I haven't finalized anything yet.
We have time for one more question. So Janet, you're just going to eke in.
29.
Oh, yeah.
I'm pretty sure you need some regulations for that. Yes. What's the process for any consultation on those regulations? Timeline for regs?
Timeline, I wouldn't be able to give you a firm answer on, but you're right. A lot of stuff will have to be worked out through regulation. This is a first of its kind legislation that's protecting women and girls in sports, something that I am very passionate about. And I've heard from a number of parents, coaches, educators, school boards, teachers, etc., both when consulting on this legislation, but I wouldn't say more so, but also in addition, whenever I'm talking about other issues, people will pull me aside and say, Minister Schow, thank you so much for this. My daughter is so grateful that you have moved this legislation. And I feel passionate about it because I know of examples already in Alberta where we have seen athletes who have been hurt playing against transgender athletes, who have lost out on opportunities. We saw Hannah Pilling, for example, who joined our press conference when we announced this legislation, who, without the support of an incredible community and a petition, likely would not have been able to compete in provincials. And that, of course, decision was overturned and she was allowed to compete. But these are the kind of examples that we want to avoid so that sports is safe and fair. But to answer your question, which I'm being a bit long-winded with, I will simply say we will continue to consult through the regulatory process and make sure we get this right. It's too important not to be consulting continuously and broadly, and I know that as we respond to those concerns, we'll make sure it's done right, and when it's moved forward, we'll be there to support everyone who has to implement this bill and the regs.
That was all I had.
Perfect. Thank you all for your time today. If you have any follow-up questions, you can find my contact information at the bottom of the accompanying news release.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. I hope you all have a Happy New Year, a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and everything else. It's going to be a nice little break. I hope you get some rest. Thank you.
Thank you.